In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing with writing up your explanation texts about the life cycle of a newt. Today, you're going to be writing about the final stage, about the adult newt. So far, you should have headings for eggs, larvae, larvae with 4 limbs, and the F stage, all with some information underneath. Today, we'll be writing about the adult stage. Also, if you remember back to last week's lesson when we were thinking about all the things that a good explanation text needs to include, one of those things was a picture or diagram. So at the end of this lesson, when you've finished your writing, you're going to start thinking about your picture or diagram that will help support the explanation further. To help you with your work for this lesson, you're going to need your notes from Tuesday the 7th of July. This is on the last stage, the final stage of the life cycle of the newt. Alongside this, you'll also need your work from yesterday, which you're going to continue writing underneath today. Last week we watched lots of videos about the life cycle of a newt. Here's the notes that I took from the adult stage of the life cycle. As you can see, they're not in full sentences again, so we're going to need to work a little bit on that in this lesson. At the end of the lesson, I'd like you to do the same thing. Transfer your notes from bullet points into full sentences. Here's my first bullet point. It has passed through its metamorphosis successfully. So I've put that into a full sentence, but the first thing I needed to do is include my heading, adult newt, because that's the new section that we'll be writing about. Underneath the new heading, I've started to write up. Now the creature has successfully passed through its metamorphosis. I've got my next 2 bullet points here. Comes through the surface of the water and must breathe with lungs. Now I'm going to use a causal conjunction to join those 2 ideas together to make one sentence. It will now cautiously come through the surface of the water and will crawl out of the pond. So it must now breathe with its lungs. So I've used the causal conjunction here to explain how that happens. The newt comes out of the water, so it must now breathe with its lungs. It can't use its gills anymore because it's not in the water anymore. The next bullet point. Tiny, about the length of a thumbnail. Tiny, about the length of a thumbnail. So I've added that into a full sentence now just below. At the early stage of its adult life. So I've done a little bit of a time connective here to show that this is in the early stage of its adult life. Newts are extremely small. They are about the length of a man's thumb. Adult newts are versatile. Most have both legs and wide tails. They can walk on land or swim in water. First 2 bullet points there seem to go well together. And again, I'm going to use a causal conjunction to join those 2 ideas into one sentence. Adult newts are versatile. They can walk on land or swim in water. Now, how can I use a causal conjunction there? Adult newts are versatile because they can walk on land or swim in water. And then I've continued, most newts have both legs and wide tails. My last bullet point. At 3 years old, return to the pond in spring to breed. Now again, not a full sentence and it needs a little bit of work. I've put, at 3 years old, the adult newts will return to the pond in the springtime to breed. Again, putting in springtime is letting the reader know when that's going to happen. At 3 years old, the adult newts will return to the pond in the springtime to breed. This is where the life cycle begins all over again. So, if you look back to our picture, all of the stages on here, you'll be able to see that the life cycle at this point will begin again, and that's a nice thing to end on. Remember that a good explanation text should have a picture or diagram to help support the explanation. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some ideas of the type of picture or diagram that you could use to support your explanation text. So this first one would be a really good diagram to have in your explanation text. It's a diagram of a newt's body. You can see here I've labelled the diagram so that the reader knows exactly what they're seeing when they look at the picture. It's then got a picture of a newt, and the picture of the newt has been labelled with all the different parts that may have been spoken about during the text. So when the reader reads this and looks at the picture, they'll be able to make much more sense of what they're reading. Another diagram that I thought would be really good for your explanation texts if you don't want to do the first one is this one. This diagram shows the life cycle of the newt. Again, this would be a really sensible choice for a diagram for your explanation text because this is what your explanation text is explaining. I've labelled my diagram again, diagram to show the life cycle of a newt, and then I've got my picture to show exactly how that happens. This will help the reader if they're reading your explanation text because they'll be able to see all the stages that you've written about in pictures, which can be really helpful when you're reading something that's a new topic or something unfamiliar. Your independent task for this lesson is in 2 parts. The first part is to write up the 5th and final stage of your notes about the life cycle of the newt. This is going to go under your work from yesterday. Once you've done that, it's time to start your diagram or picture to support your explanation text.
Another thing that sets them apart from frog tadpoles, newts are born carnivores and remain so their entire lives. While young larvae will consume a number of aquatic invertebrates such as Daphnia, mosquito larvae and worms, the terrestrial adults will consume any small animal they can catch and swallow whole, though they mainly feed on slow-moving mollusks such as slugs and abundantly available isopods such as woodlice. While predators, they themselves are prey to a plethora of species, including the aforementioned snakes. Young tend to thrive in places devoid of predatory fish, though even in places without fish they must be cautious of their own parents and other adults, as cannibalism is quite common. While adults need to be cautious of just about anything bigger than they are, unless of course they are lucky enough to be packing poison. In the United Kingdom we have 3 native species, the palmate and smooth newt, which both belong to the genus Lysotriton, and the great crested newt, belonging to the genus Tritorus, which is unfortunately threatened by habitat loss. Sadly, this is a common theme around the world. Many newts and other amphibians are under threat from human expansion and pollution. The Yunnan lake newt of China being the most recent species to have gone extinct as of 2004.